Thanks, Paula. Hi, everyone. Jen Masutani with the Hawaii After School Alliance. And welcome, like Paula said, to our Out of School Time community meetings, which is our weekly series where the after school youth development education fields come together and we learn from each other, share resources, and just provide support for each other during this pandemic. Today, we are going to focus on managing disruptive and challenging behaviors. And we are excited to have two experts with us to help us understand some of the typical causes of challenging behaviors and provide simple strategies to have more success when working with these children. But before that, we wanted to share a couple of announcements and resources. First, we wanted to encourage you all to sign up for the conference on education and social justice, which is on December 4th through 6th. So instead of our usual OST meeting on December 4th, we'll be attending this conference and hope you will join us as well virtually. It's led by Kevin Kumishiro, and the conference is focusing on fostering conversations about advancing equity and justice in education and how we can start building a movement around that. The conference offers registration rates on a sliding scale, so if you have limited resources, you can get a registration rate at a subsidized price. And then I'm going to pass it back to Paula to talk about some resources to help children cope with COVID during the holidays. But before that, we just wanted to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving and hope you can practice gratitude and celebrate family while remaining safe and protecting yourself and your family. We also just wanted to share our sincere appreciations and just thanks for all the work that you're doing. You know, we know that this has not been an easy year to say the least, and we know that you're all working really hard to continue to support our families and our children. So we just thank you for your commitment to that and for continuing to persevere through this year. So yeah, we just wanted to say happy Thanksgiving, and I'll pass it back to Paula.
Thank you, Jen. Well, we were talking to some organizations, providing services to kids and youth, and we thought that it would be important for us to address the fact that these holidays are not going to be the same holidays as last year. And changes are happening, and the kids, especially the kids, but also ourselves, need some space to talk about this, to talk about the holidays. I think Halloween was already like a test of what to expect for Thanksgiving and the end of the year holidays. And I think us working with youth and kids should provide this safe space where the kids can share how they feel and express, maybe they have some kind of anxieties or concern about the holidays. Here in Hawaii, we tend to gather with a lot of people and we tend to celebrate, and you can feel like the holidays in the streets and in the malls and at school and everywhere. And this year, those things are not going to happen. So I am asking politely, so if you can have some time with your after school kids and youth, and maybe, talk story about what they are expecting from the holidays and what it might happen and might not happen. And so we put together some resources that I think Lexi is putting on the chat, where you can get ideas of how to facilitate this conversation with them. And I echo Jen, happy Thanksgiving for everybody. It's my favorite holiday. And I hope everybody has a safe one and enjoy friends and family in a very, very safe way. And now I'm going to introduce Crystal and Matt. Matt Brink is a licensed psychologist and the CEO of Malama Pono Autism Center. He has many years of experience working with children and adolescents across a variety of settings, including correctional facilities, inpatient psychiatric hospitals, and outpatient behavioral health programs. And Crystal Hampton is a licensed behavioral analyst and the director of the Hawaii Department of Education programs for Malama Pono Autism Center. She has a wide background working with behavioral issues in children and adolescents, including consulting with parents and teachers on best practices for improving behavioral outcomes in youth. So thank you so much, Crystal and Matt. for being with us today.
Great.
Thanks everyone for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you for that introduction. All right, everyone, I'm going to share my screen here and Crystal, what do you see there?
I see PowerPoint like you haven't started it. Now I see
There we
presenting.
go. All right. Okay. Well, aloha, everyone. Happy Aloha Friday. It's the week before Thanksgiving, so I know in some ways there's a lot going on, and in some ways we're going to hopefully get to slow down a little bit next week. So we appreciate everyone's time today. Really excited to get to share some information with you. We understand that the work all of you are doing is super valuable. You are hands-on working with our students and our children, and so I'm hoping that some of the information we can share with you today will be valuable and will help you in the work that you're doing. We have 1 hour, so it's going to go quick. I'm going to speak a little bit here at the beginning, then Crystal's going to share some information with you all, and we're going to build in some time at the end for questions and for a little bit of discussion. I know we were talking here a few minutes ago that presentations like this oftentimes work better when we're all in the same room and we can share stories, and this happened one time with a student and I saw this happen one time and this works and that doesn't work. But as it is, we're on Zoom here, and so we'll do our best with this. If there is anyone that wants to ask a question or speak up, don't be shy about interrupting us. We're totally fine with that. So you can unmute yourself and jump in at any time. With all that said, let's get started. So just quick introduction. This is who I am. That's who Crystal is. That's the least important part of this. Managing disruptive behaviors in children. Now, when we do this presentation, there often are some other titles that we could be calling a presentation like this. For instance, I don't get paid enough to do this. Oftentimes, we know that the jobs you all are doing, you're having fun, you're enjoying time with the kids, and things are going well. But then when things that we're calling disruptive and challenging behaviors come up, you think, man alive, this is, I'm not getting paid enough for this. Or maybe this was not what they told me I was going to be doing. We could call this this presentation here, why won't this child just do what they're supposed to do? Now, I don't know if the Simpsons are still fashionable or politically correct, or if anyone's watching The Simpsons, but Homer Simpson, his approach to managing disruptive behavior was something like this. And of course, I'm not advocating for ever putting hands on a child or actually doing this. But I think the humor in this picture is that sometimes when we don't know what to do with a child's behavior, and we've tried all the tricks and all the tips and everything that we know, and we still can't get it, we feel a little bit like this. And part of what we're going to talk about today is understanding our role in a child's behavior and being aware of our presence there. So a couple things I want to highlight here. First of all, there are no silver bullets. Oftentimes when we give talks like this, people will say, okay, thanks, Guy, that's great, but the child did this, and what should I do? And we're open to try and help counsel and consult on questions like this, such as I put one here, well, if he curses at me, what should I do? But the old parable or phrase, you can teach someone to fish and they eat for a day. I'm sorry, you can give them a fish and they eat for a day, or you teach them to fish and they eat for a lifetime. It's kind of that idea here that really our interest here is not in the specific behavior of the student, but is in learning the skills to better understand that behavior. And then you can deal with all kinds of behaviors, and we can substitute, he cursed at me, he hit at me, he disrespected me, he walked away, he ignored me. And you'll have the tools, whatever the behavior is. So our goal today is a couple things. The first one is I want us to be thinking about the why behind the behavior. A lot of times when a child behaves in a specific way that we're struggling with or that we don't like, we get caught up in specifically what that behavior is. And the trick here is, if there's nothing else that you learned today, I want you to think about this, is that your efforts are going to be much more successful if you think about, why is this behavior happening? Now, you may be thinking, yeah, of course, that's what we always do. But hopefully I'll be able to challenge you a little bit here today on why that's important. The second goal I have for you is not only to understand the why, but to learn to start responding to that why. In behavioral sciences study, which is where Crystal is an expert, she's going to speak in a few minutes, we talk about this as the function of the behavior, of the why. Why is this child behaving in that way? And there always is a reason. It's not always clear. It's not always easy to figure out. But when we start asking that question and looking for that, we have a lot more success. Now, one other thing here as a means of introduction I want to talk about is forget about the labels. Invariably, people will say, okay, but how should we respond to a child with autism? Or how should we respond to a child with Down syndrome? Or what do we do if the child has serious emotional issues? What if the child is depressed? Or what if the child's anxious? Or what if the child has been abused or comes from a bad home? Or what if the child has trauma? Or on and on and on. We can throw all the labels out. The labels are not important. In fact, oftentimes when we get stuck on a label that all kids with dyslexia behave this way, or all kids with this issue behave that way, it oftentimes limits our creativity and our ability to look past that label and get to the why behind what's going on with that behavior. So forget about the labels, they're not going to help us. Two things we're going to do today. One is my portion, which is we're going to try to understand the why behind disruptive behaviors. And then Crystal's going to jump in and say, the what should we do once we understand that why. Okay, so the first thing is misbehaving. So I want you to, if we were all in the same room, I had everyone shout out some definitions of misbehaving, but since we're all probably sitting in rooms by ourselves or sharing offices, just think about for a second, if you had to shout out an answer, how would you define misbehaving? Okay, I'm gonna wait, think of something. All right. So misbehaving, some things that people often will say, acting out, the child's just being difficult, the child's not following the rules, child's causing trouble, being disruptive, all different kinds of words we might use to describe. Really, if we had to simplify this, the most simple definition I can think of is the child is not doing what I want them to do. I gave them a direction and they refused to do it. I told them, stop doing that or start doing that, don't do that or do that. But in the end, this is all about the child is not doing what you want them to do. Now, when a child doesn't do what we want them to do, what's our first natural tendency? It is usually to start labeling that child. We say things like, well, that's just a bad kid. That's why he or she, and I do have, I will own now that I have a tendency to just to label all this as he's, but of course she's can behave poorly as well. We know that. So the kid's a troublemaker. She doesn't want to learn. They're a problem child. They come from a bad family. I know who that family is, and no wonder that child's acting that way. I know who those parents are. We have all these ideas we come up with that are really aimed at personalizing the behavior to the child. These labels challenge the moral or character of that child. They really are saying that child is a bad kid, and that's why they're behaving this way. And hopefully, I don't have to convince anyone here that none of our children are trying to be bad children. They may behave in ways that we'd label as bad. They may be misbehaving, but all of our children are, in my opinion, trying to do the right thing, are trying to make their way through life and doing the best they can. And I could tell you stories about my childhood, and I probably was labeled bad and learning disabled and all kinds of things as a child, but we're all trying to do our best. And as soon as we start personalizing and labeling our kids as bad kids, we're not going to have much success. So the first thing is to think about that. Now, the second thing is every behavior happens for a reason. This may seem like another one of those kind of simple things that, yeah, okay, of course that's true, but stop and think about this. We oftentimes just kind of assume or take for granted that, oh, I'm behaving this way. I got up and I went outside, or I got a bite to eat, or I did this or that. All the behaviors we do, there always is a reason behind them. Now, we're often not aware of it, or we may not be thinking about it, but those behaviors are there. And the reason for our behavior, whatever it is, usually isn't that we're trying to be disruptive, or we're trying to be challenging, or that we're just being bad. And this is true for our kids. Even when they are acting in some of the wildest, out of control ways, and being as disruptive as any student can be, they're probably not trying to be bad. So we're going to answer that why here in a few minutes and try and better understand that. So I'm going to go back to the Homer Simpson well. Just because I don't care doesn't mean I don't understand. I had to read this a couple times. I was like, wait a minute, what does that mean? And that's part of the beauty in the Simpsons humor is Homer is, of course, always a bit confused about things. But what I loved about this quote when I saw it is the idea that sometimes the reason behind the behavior isn't clear. And don't we know that oftentimes the kids we're working with are acting like they don't care? Sometimes that's because they really don't understand. Or sometimes they understand, but they don't care. And we have to always be asking those questions and not just take behavior at face value that child's acting like they don't care. We need to look behind that and say, yeah, okay, they're acting like they don't care. That's the behavior, but why are they acting like they don't care? And when we start to answer that question is when we start to have some success. Now, I'm going to challenge everyone here. Instead of us doing what, I'll raise my hand, we all naturally do, which is say, that's a bad kid, that's a troublemaker, they're not even trying. Instead of doing that, let's look back at ourselves, the big I have circled here, and say, what can I do different? How can I try and better understand the student? How can I change something in the environment? How can I understand the why? And as soon as you make that switch from blaming the student and challenging yourself, is when you're going to start to have some success and build new tools that you maybe didn't think you had in you. So parent-teacher night, back-to-school night for The Simpsons. Let's share the blame. Of course, we're not blaming teachers or educators or any of you folks that work with our kids, but we do want to start with ourselves. Okay, so let's get to the why. Behavior happens for two reasons. Every single thing we do and our students do happens for one of two reasons. One, we want something. So about a month ago, a couple weeks ago, leading up to Halloween, and I'm at the store pushing a cart, and we're going down that candy aisle, and I see a mom with I don't know, 2, 3, 4-year-old sitting in the buggy, sitting in the cart, and pushing the child. And the child says, "Mama, candy." No, you can have it. And then it goes down a little bit further, and the kid grabs a piece of candy and throws it in the cart, and the mom says, "No," and takes it and puts it back and goes down a little further, and the kid does it again. And I'm watching this, and I'm, So in our context, what we're talking about today, what is the why behind that behavior? Well, we know the why is easy. That child wants candy. But the mom said no once, twice, 3 times. But guess what? About the 4th or 5th time, towards the end of the aisle, the mom said, "Fine, okay," and took a bag of candy and put it in the cart. So we know why that child kept doing it, even though the mom kept saying no. They wanted something, and they knew that would work. And so when our students are doing something that we label as behavior that we don't like, this disruptive, we have to figure out, what does that child want? So what do kids want? Well, a lot of these things that we kind of know and are common sense, but are worth talking about. So praise, we know that praise feels good. We know being recognized for doing something well feels good. Kids want that. Even if they don't have the words to say that I like praise or I want to be recognized, that's a natural a feeling that feels good. Independence. Man, we as human beings, we are wired to be independent, to be unique. It starts, if you've ever been around a 2-year-old, what's a 2-year-old's favorite word? No. Even at 2, kids start flexing themselves a little bit and pushing boundaries and saying, I want to be independent. It starts early and it never stops. And so recognizing that kids want some independence, and that does not mean we let them do whatever they want. It means if we think part of the why behind a behavior is this child is trying to prove their independence, maybe we can find some healthy or creative or appropriate ways for them to have some independence, that all of a sudden that behavior reduces now because they got what they wanted, what they were looking for. Attention. This is an easy one. We know that oftentimes kids are looking for attention, and don't we know that if you don't give them positive attention, they will still find a way to get attention, and it might be throwing a chair across the room. All of a sudden, they have our full attention. Food. I think we're all familiar with the term hangry. When you're so hungry that you're angry, kids are not immune to that as well. Safety. Whoops. Safety. This one's interesting to me, and I think we could say, well, of course, kids are safe. I'm keeping my kids safe. It's not what we're talking about here. This is more of an emotional safety. So kids need to have boundaries. Boundaries make us feel safe. And sometimes if kids, especially if they come from a background where maybe they haven't always had good boundaries or good supervision, when we perceive that we don't have boundaries, we feel unsafe. And oftentimes I found that when kids are misbehaving, they are pushing and pushing and pushing to figure out where is the boundary. And when they find that boundary, they feel safe. And I'll give you an example. How many of you, when you go to sleep at night, do you lock your door? A lot of us probably do. Now, are you locking your door because you think someone's going to break in your house that night? Probably not. If you thought someone was going to break in your house, you would probably stay awake and have the phone by your hand and grab a baseball bat or a weapon. No, you're locking that door because now you're setting the boundary. You feel safe. And now you feel comfortable curling up and going to sleep. It's not because there's actually a threat to you. It's because you feel safe when you know where that boundary is. Our students are oftentimes pushing those limits because they're looking for that boundary. And if we can set that for them firmly and early and with love, with kindness, oftentimes we can prevent some of those behaviors. Physical comfort. If kids are cold, if they're hungry, if they don't have what they need to be physically comfortable, we're going to have behaviors. Routine. I think for most of us, we enjoy our routines and it helps us feel kind of comfortable. But especially for kids who have learning needs or emotional needs or other behavioral issues that we might label, routine especially is important. Okay, so behavior happens for two reasons. The first one is they want something. The second reason we behave is because we don't want something. So what does it mean to not want something? It means we're trying to avoid something or get away from something. There's something that we don't like. There's something that's aversive to us, something we don't want to do. I'll share a quick story. My youngest son, about 6 months ago said, "Hey, Pops, can I download a little game on your phone?" I said, "Is it free?" "Yeah, okay, fine." He downloaded some little race car game. Well, a couple weeks later, I got to the office in the morning and was kind of unpacking my desk and getting ready to start the day, and a little ding popped up on my phone, and I opened it, and it was a little reminder to play the game. And I'm like, "Oh, what is this?" So I started playing this little race game, and 15 minutes later, I looked down. I'm like, "I'm still sitting here playing this stupid game on my phone. What is going on?" Well, what's the why behind that? The why was I had a stack of emails to get to, and I had a stack of phone calls to make, and I had all kinds of work to do. But playing that little video game was letting me avoid doing what I really needed to do. We all do this all the time, and the students we work with, of course, do this as well. So what are the things that kids do not want to do, that they're trying to avoid or get away from? Well, let's talk about attention. Now, you may say, "Well, wait a minute, buddy, you said a few minutes ago that kids want attention." Yes, and sometimes they don't want attention. And you knowing the difference between when they want attention and when they don't want attention might help you reduce some of these behaviors. Embarrassment. Nobody likes to be shamed or embarrassed. And sometimes for some students who are especially sensitive, even a quick redirection or a scolding in front of their peers can embarrass them quickly. Some students, when they feel embarrassed, are going to shrink and hide. Some students, when they feel embarrassed, are going to get angry and hostile quickly, and being able to know the difference will help. Now, you may be saying, "Well, this guy's telling us to let kids do whatever they want." Absolutely not. But there are many ways that you can redirect a child, and sometimes redirecting a child in front of all their peers can cause embarrassment and cause shame, and that can lead to problematic behaviors. Failure. Nobody likes to feel like a failure. That's obvious. But sometimes when we ask a child to do something that they don't have the skills to do, that they're not prepared to do, they know they're going to fail. If they're afraid they're going to fail, they may really avoid that or do anything they can to get away from testing that theory that maybe they're going to fail. Work expectations. Again, we have to be careful what expectations we're putting on our students. It helps to know your students. Crystal's going to talk about this in a few minutes, but when you know what your students are capable of or not capable of, you can put appropriate expectations on them. Not all students, not all kids are going to be able to do the same things. Unknown, unsafe. So sometimes our children are trying to get away from something that they don't know, that doesn't feel safe. You're putting them in a new situation. You're asking them to do something that feels unsafe or unknown to them, and they'll do everything they can to avoid that. And then physical discomfort here again. I think that's pretty obvious. Okay, so disruptive and challenging behavior. Every behavior happens for a reason. What I want you all to be thinking about is to understand the why behind that. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Crystal here in a second. We'll circle back around at the end here, and we'll take some questions so we can talk through some of this as you're trying to think about how do you best understand what is the why behind the behavior. All right, Crystal, all yours.
Sounds great. So Matt just covered the why, or trying to figure out what the why is for behavior. So now I want to share, kind of steer our conversation to looking at what do we do? What do we do now that we know some of these whys? The information I'm going to kind of go into is very generalized strategies, just very standard tools that you can use no matter what that why is, or no matter what the actual behavior is. So the first thing we want to do is be proactive. So I'll go into a little bit of some tools we can use. The best thing that we will be able to do to support a behavior happens before that behavior ever happens. So that starts with getting to know your student. Matt shared a little bit about this already, but we want to know, what is that student like? What are their favorite things? What is also their least favorite things? What are the triggers or those situations that are going to make them feel uncomfortable or embarrassed or upset, or any of those different whys that come up? With knowing the student, we also want to know ourselves and what our priorities for the day. There's going to be certain things throughout the time you have with this student that have to happen, really important things that must get done. Maintaining safety, maintaining health, those are obviously going to be priorities for us. There's gonna be other things throughout the day that maybe they're not essential. We just want that student to do it. It would make our day easier if they do it. So if you know the difference between those types of things, of what has to happen and what you just really want to happen, you can know where to push the student and when you can kind of take a step back and give them some space to maybe do something that would be more preferred and more enjoyable, because what's going on in that moment isn't mandatory for them to complete. And then the third component here is setting that student up for success. So can we remove some things in the environment that trigger behavior? Can we let them have the things that they want or the things that they need before they need to show us a behavior to get it? When we know the things that they want and things they're trying to accomplish, and we can set them up to get access to that or to get away from the things that they don't want, we're more likely to be successful. And with that, we want to acknowledge the success. If we can see them using their words, or see them, listening to our instructions and doing the things that are expected of them, when we acknowledge that and celebrate that and give them praise for that, they're going to be more likely to do it again, and less likely to need to use challenging behavior to do that. And then one side note is also having things like, if there's certain tools that student is used to, maybe a visual schedule, or they need a communication device to express themselves. If we know that those are tools that are successful in the normal school day, if we can try to have those available for them as well, that will make them more comfortable in this environment and ready to be successful with what we have for them. Onward, Matt. And so the next part of kind of a proactive approach as well, but starting with fun. So when a student comes to us during our time with them, we want to start that interaction in a fun, positive way. Any working relationship needs to build on a foundation of rapport and have that from the get-go before you can dive into anything deep or challenging. So that's especially true for our students. If we can start, we call this pairing, associating ourselves, the staff, and that environment with fun and positivity, that student's going to be more likely to want to engage with the demands or the challenges that come up in that setting. With that, we want to keep the demands low at first. So when that student arrives, possibly we can have something that they really, really like, maybe a preferred snack to get the day started. And then we can start to do things that maybe they don't like kind of gradually build that in over the day. If you think of it kind of like a roller coaster, just kind of building up that mountain to that challenging hill that's coming up, that will help them be more successful. On the flip side of that, think if the student walks in at the start of the day and the very first thing we're going to ask them to do is something that they really don't like, that's not setting them up for success. That's going to lead to more challenging behaviors for us. From there, the next strategy is keeping it simple. This one is important in all aspects of the work that we do, but especially when we're giving instructions. For students that have challenging behaviors, the more simple we can keep our instructions and our expectations, the more successful they can be. We like to use what's called first then language. So that's where we let the student know first, what is it that they need to do that's maybe non-preferred? Then what will they get for completing that? If we can set that contingency or that expectation, they're more likely to be successful. If we start and we say, okay, first you've got to do this art activity, and they really hate it. Then you get your iPad. If they're super focused on getting that iPad or that fun thing that they want, then if we let them know that that is coming next, they'll help them move through that less preferred activity. From there, perhaps from what we've learned and what we know about that student, we need to adjust our expectations. Maybe there are certain activities that trigger behavior every single time. We know, maybe they really don't like group games. So every time that we have a group game, they get upset, they shut down. Okay, maybe the student doesn't have to participate in that type of activity. Can we set them up in a different area and let them do something that's more preferred and just simply avoid that trigger altogether? That's okay. And then finally, modifying activities. As we get to know these students, if we know they like certain characters, they really like stickers, they really like bubbles, can we build in those interests into the activities that we need them to complete to help them be more motivated and want to be there and want to do that less preferred activity? The next part is being consistent. I would say this is going to trickle into every aspect of what we do as well. From the get-go, just meaning what we say. An empty threat is not something that's going to be successful with our students, and especially with challenging behaviors. I would say we need to mean what we say with the positive consequences and also the negative consequences. If we are telling the student, like we have a student that's being disruptive, for example, and we say, okay, if you don't get it together, I'm going to turn the TV off, or I'm going to take away your toy. And we keep saying that, right? Matt's example, the parent walking down the candy aisle and mom saying, no, you can't have the candy, you can't have the candy. They keep grabbing it, Eventually mom caves. She's not consistent. That student is learning that behavior gets the thing that they want. So we want to mean what we say and follow through with the expectation that we set. And at the same time, if we give the expectation of, hey, if you finish this activity, then you get this yummy snack that you really love. And when that student finishes that activity, we need to give them the snack. We need to be trustworthy and follow through with those expectations that we set. Maintaining routines, that's another one. As Matt mentioned, routines are great for all of us, especially for students that have challenging behavior. So anytime we can keep that consistent expectation and they know what's coming and that's familiar and that's comfortable and they feel safe in that setting, that is going to ultimately lead to more positive behavioral results. And if that routine can't be consistent, life happens, COVID happens, different challenges come up that change our routine. We want to give notice for that. Let them know verbally, just giving them reminders. That might mean using a timer to say, okay, in 10 minutes, this different thing's going to happen. If we can give them as much notice as possible and share those expectations with them, they're going to feel more comfortable, they'll feel more in control, and ultimately have less behaviors. And then the final point here is consistency across staff. We all know in the fields that we work in, staff changes frequently, or new faces come in, or some faces leave. So we can't always guarantee that the same staff are there to work with the child. That'd be great, that'd be wonderful. But even if there's different staff members working with a student, if we can all be on the same page and share the information, share what we've learned about that student, share what works, keep consistent rules, keep consistent expectation, no matter who is working with the student that day, that will go a long way in avoiding future behavior challenges. So that's all well and great strategies that we have, but what happens when it doesn't work? It's not a perfect plan, you know, it's not going to go the way we expect every single time. But when that does happen, there's some very simple things that we can do to support a student with challenging behavior. The first one is offering help. When you know the why of what that student is trying to get or trying to avoid, you can step in and help them problem solve or help them accomplish that task and get out of it more quickly. So let's say they're doing an activity and they spill something all over the table and they get frustrated, right? We can step in, oh, let me help you, and start to remove that frustrating trigger, and so they can work through it and move out of that behavior. The next one is guiding the appropriate response. So we call that prompting in my field that we work in. That just means we're going to give some type of cue or some type of help or guide to enable that student to make the response we're looking for. So maybe we know that there's a preferred staff member that they really want to see and they're frustrated because that person's not there. Well, let's teach them and help them to say, I want Miss Sally. And then once they can ask for that person, we can take a walk down to the other room and see that person that they really want to see. So we can coach them and help them ask and show a more appropriate behavior instead of the challenging behavior, that will lead to success. And then the third point here, you know, sometimes we might try to help, we might try to prompt, and it just doesn't work. That they're too escalated to accept that help or to accept that prompt, and we just need to wait. That's our best strategy that we can do, is try to not add additional demands, additional instructions, or attention. Really just kind of take a step back, give them the space to de-escalate, make sure they're safe, monitor the environment. You know, are there kind of a lot of people around? Like, can we have some of those people leave the room so that this student has some time to get calm? Are there things around that could become unsafe? Maybe they like to throw furniture, so let's remove all the extra chairs out of the way so that they can't do that. But other than that, just kind of stand back and wait for them to come down from that intense episode. And once we see that they're back at a neutral state, then we can step in, offer to help, or try to teach them a better way to get the things that they want. And I think that kind of sums up my portion, and with the goal of really just addressing that why that Matt talked about, and figure out how we can support that student to more appropriately get the things that they want or get away from the things that they do not want.
Awesome, Crystal. Thank you. Thank you. So gang, we, as I said at the beginning, we wanted to build some time here at the end. I have sat through talks like this before, and I know I've had the response that maybe many of you are having, which is, that's great, guys, but you don't know the student I have. That's great, but you don't know what I have to deal with. You're right, we don't, although we probably have been there and done that. But I think having some dialogue and questions here helps us kind of help you think through these behaviors the way that we're talking about here. So I would love to open it up to people that may want to either ask questions about anything we talked about, challenge some of the ideas that we've thrown out here, bring up specific student examples. We'll leave it open here for a second. So who has something?
Feel free to unmute yourself and shout it out, or you can use the chat box as well.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was wrong with the mic, so I had to call in. What if a child like completely shuts down? Like there's no response to anything, like, oh, please do this or do that, and they just sit there non-compliant at all. What's your advice for that? Because a lot of the other advice you have is more like, okay, they react differently, but not completely shut down?
Yeah, I love that question because you're absolutely right that oftentimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So sometimes the loudest, the most verbal child in the classroom or in this environment gets the attention, and that kid that shuts down and is just non-compliant is sometimes even more challenging to really answer that question of why, because they're not giving you much to go on. So what's your name, sir? How would you mute yourself?
TJ, I work at Kids Hurt Too.
Great. So TJ, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit since you were brave and went first. What are some of the whys you think could be going on? And of course, we might not know, but if you had to speculate, why might a child just shut down and give you nothing?
Just from a few kids, one of the most common is that we do grief and trauma. So all the kids we have, like a parent has died or they're separated from family members, even before COVID. So sometimes they build a relationship with one of our facilitators and then the facilitator calls out sick. So that's like the main reason. But sometimes it's everything is the perfect setup for them and then they still come and they're just, so we don't really know. Like it's the hardest with this because it's like, we don't know what happens outside because we're not after school in the sense of like, oh, class finished, okay, walk to the cafeteria. It's more like, okay, like it's a 6 o'clock evening group. We have evening meals and then we do support groups. Yeah, and we're not in contact with the teachers as much.
Yeah. I think, from the way you're describing some of the work you're doing, it sounds like you already know one of the whys, which is this might be a child that emotionally is struggling in some way. We don't even have to necessarily speculate more than that, but just to say that this is probably a child that has some sensitivities, some grief and loss trauma, like you said. So this is that we probably, I talked about some of those whys, like what's the child trying to get or trying to get away from. And this is probably a child that's trying to get away from some things. We could speculate some of the feelings or that sense of loss, or that someone else is going to walk out on me or die, or I'll lose someone else. So a lot of fear about loss, a lot of probably fear around safety. So that might be a child that we may want to, as Crystal talked about, give them some very easy things to do, as opposed to things that may feel more challenging to them. Now we may say, all I did was ask them to come sit in the circle and listen in the discussion or to share their name, and they wouldn't even do that. Well, that might be for that student a really difficult, challenging thing. Crystal talked about adjusting expectations. So it may be for that student that we adjust expectations and say, hey, would you be willing to sit in the back of the room? The rest of us are going to sit in the circle, and would you be willing to sit in the back of the room and give them something very easy? Or maybe you hand them a stuffed animal and say, hey, would you be willing to hold the stuffed animal for me? And those very easy, small steps to try and build some of that, what Crystal called pairing, or that relationship, to get that connection. So the child starts following some of your directions, and you can build up to those bigger ones. Crystal, anything you would add there?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. Matt, would you mind stop sharing so we can maybe see each other a little better?
Okay. There you go. Beautiful.
Perfect. Yeah. So I would piggyback on that and say that it sounds like what this child really, or a child like this would really need, is just that feeling of safety and that feeling of that consistency. They've probably lost some things that create this, or lots of people that create this fear of losing more people, or even staff changes. If they're really connected to certain staff and then that staff member is not there on another day, that's going to create some type of emotional response perhaps. So what Matt shared about just keeping the expectations really low, welcoming them like where they are. If they just kind of want to stay 10 feet away from everybody, okay, that's close enough. You can sit in your own little spot and do your own little thing, and whatever we need to do to kind of accommodate and make sure that they feel safe and they feel encouraged, and just create that atmosphere would be my starting point for sure. Yeah. Does
Awesome.
that help?
Thank you.
Yeah. We had a chat box question. See if I can find it. How do you suggest handling a child that runs away or physically lashes out? I think I would kind of imitate Matt's response to the first question. And could you share, or do you think some of the whys? after hearing about what those potential whys could be? I think that was Melanie that shared that.
I think some of it that they're just trying to escape from the
I can tell if you're speaking. I'm not sure, I can't hear.
Yeah, I don't, yeah.
There you
Oh, I
go.
hear you, yeah,
Is it working?
it's working.
Okay. I'm not, yeah, okay. So no, I mean, most of what we've seen is because they're trying to get away from something, or the family has allowed it in the past, like let them run away, they go to a calming spot and sit down, but yet because it's a new setting, sometimes the parents are like, oh yeah, just let them run home, and we're like, no, we can't. You know what I mean? You know, so there's challenges like that we face, and you know, what do you suggest we do? Because we physically try not to you know, restrain them or keep them, because that'll cause an escalation of their outburst.
Right, and probably make
But-
them want to get away even more.
Yeah, so do you have any suggestions as far as, because it's something they're trained to do at home already, you know, like the mom says, oh yeah, he gets upset, just let him run to his room or whatever, and then we just leave him alone. And we're like, but when we're at the park or, you know, where we do our activities, they run, but there's not necessarily home, or they just run.
Right.
And, you know, we've tried to create like a safe spot, but sometimes the safe spot isn't what they want at that time.
Right.
And they just go beyond that, and they just, you know, like, so we're trying to, yeah.
Yeah, that great question. Big challenge. I've been in that situation before. I've worked with children like that, and I think you kind of highlighted one of the biggest challenges is if you're at somewhere like the park, for example. I don't know if there's a way for, I don't know what the setup's like, if there's a way for there to be a more like kind of restricted place, like where there's at least a fence, or, you know, being somewhere inside until like the relationship is built with this child, so that you can have some of that instructional control, as we call it, where they will listen and come back when you call them and that sort of thing. But I think if you can identify a place that is appropriate for them to run to, and before they even have the opportunity to run, kind of talk through that and share that would be a good goal to work towards. That takes time though, that's hard. In the meantime, I would focus on those proactive tips that I shared, like what can we do to make this more fun? What can we do to make them want to be here? What are some things that they really like that we could have in our possession that they're gonna want to come to us to get those fun things? Are there favorite snacks they have every day, or toys or something?
Yeah, so what we did was we had like what we call, like, you know, fidget toys, fancy bag stuff, drawing, whatever. But because the parents kind of let them do that at home, it makes it a lot more challenging for us.
For sure.
You know,
Yeah.
so it's trying to separate home versus park versus, you know, the consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% right, because especially, you know, you're probably with this student for a small portion of the day, and then they're going to be at home for most likely more time than you have with them. So that you're working against something that's more ingrained because they're used to that. So I empathize with you that is challenging, but my main strategy that I would pull from is trying to learn more about what they really like, and keeping that in your possession, and being the one that has all that fun, and in getting them to associate this experience with a positive one, hopefully having positive things that they don't normally have at home, so they'll be more motivated to want to be a part of it. Matt, any other ideas you could share?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common question, situations like this, and I think I'm going to go back to the why question. So we might not know what the why is, so we'll take the behavior you're talking about, that the student runs away and just takes off. They're clearly trying to get away from something. We don't know what. And it's okay for us to kind of put our experimenting hat on, to be a scientist and say, well, I think it might be that this child, let's say, is just independent. I talked earlier about how we all want to be independent. And maybe this is a child that at home, they're allowed to kind of do what they want when they want and come and go. And then here you are stopping that. And so they're trying to get away from someone that's taken away their independence. So we might say it could be the child's trying to be independent. So I'm gonna give them some way to do that appropriately. If they're trying to get away from my boundaries, then I may say, okay, hey, Johnny, come here. You are now going to be in charge of making sure everybody stands in line. Here's a clipboard, here's a pen, and you give him or her some responsibility so that they now get to be more independent. You're in charge of making sure everyone stands in line. So I need to make sure you stay here in the room so you pay attention to that. Now that child is scratching that itch to be independent and be in charge, but doing it in an appropriate way. Or another way to maybe address that is you tell the child, hey, and again, I don't want to shame or embarrass them, so I'm going to pull them aside and say, hey, I know that sometimes when you get bored or overwhelmed or whatever the situation is, you take off and run away. I'm okay with you taking breaks. You can run away to that corner of the room, you can run away to the hall, or you can run away to the slide, whatever some appropriate places where that child can run away. Those are the options you have. So we oftentimes will give kids choices that allows them to feel empowered. They still have some control, but that they're not choosing the one thing that we know they can't be doing. So, I think thinking behind what is that why will help you try to frame what a good response is to help that child meet their need.
Okay, thank you. Because we tried some of those techniques and we still ran into walls. So we're like,
I can add one thought that came to mind. Sometimes we're quick to say, okay, this kid runs away because he wants to get away from whatever this is. Sometimes that's not true. Sometimes you want to look and see, okay, what's he really getting when he runs away? Is a staff member chasing after him? Is someone yelling and saying, come back, don't do that? What other factors might be contributing to that behavior? Maybe he's actually getting attention from it. Maybe he's disrupting the whole class and maybe people are laughing, or what else is going on that might be a part of that why.
Yeah, so we asked the parent and she says, yeah, when you chase him, he thinks it's a game. So we tried not to chase, but at some point there's a safety issue because of the road and all that, so we're trying, I mean, just for future, because this already passed. So we're like trying to figure it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, if you know that it's a safety issue with the road, if you can, as proactive as you can be about that before it happens, maybe you set up the group like as far away from the road as possible. So, if he runs that he's less likely to go to the road, or position a staff member kind of closer to the road before a behavior happens. So, that you've got someone that can kind of corral if needed, so you're not having to chase specifically.
We've also at times, or something like a road or a safety issue is always kind of trumps everything. Obviously, we seem to keep a child physically safe first and foremost. Aside from that, we oftentimes will kind of put a trailer on a kiddo. If we have a kid that likes to take off and run and we think, as Crystal said, that it's really they're looking for that attention and they like being chased, we'll make sure that we have an adult who has eyes on the child, but maybe is, a couple hundred feet behind them, behind a tree, on the side of the building, watching what the child's doing to make sure they're not, completely running away, but to make sure that they're not getting that attention for being tracked. It's a tricky one, though, for sure. That's a tricky behavior.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, lollipops work. We have that in the chat box. That is true. They work on me. They work on a lot of children.
Yes. Yeah, especially when you can catch them doing the right thing and give them a lollipop for that, and that will motivate them to want to do that again. Oh, yes, raising your hand. Tosa? Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, we can't hear you.
See, you went unmuted, but I cannot hear you. Can you type? Okay. Marie shared in the chat box as well. If a child in a group of 15 to 20 kids participate In an outdoor group game, for example, tag, such as sharks and minnows, because she always gets tagged, and then they start to talk negative or comment on others and becomes upset because they got tagged out. The why would be because they are not as physically fit to run or keep up in the game, may be embarrassed if constantly getting tagged and not being able to catch anyone else. Should you have them sit out or try to make them engaged? How do you help a child that hates losing or being out? What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple great questions in there. Not being physically fit enough, we can't change that if they just don't have the athletic skills as the other kids or slower. So we're not going to try and address that. But I love the other questions of why do we think that child is getting upset? And it could be that they don't like losing. I don't like losing either. So that one's is easy. So what I'm going to start thinking about is, do I want to focus on teaching this child how to lose? Because that might be a really effective thing to work with that child on. Or do I want to work on changing the environment so they don't lose as much? It depends on your role and what you're trying to do with that child. If I'm trying to teach them how to lose, then I might grab that bag of lollipops or stuffed animal or whatever motivates that child and say, today is a lesson. We're going to work everyone on losing. And I'm not going to isolate that specific child because that would embarrass her. But I'll say, today we're going to work on losing, and I have a bag of lollipops. And whoever can, I'm going to set up a game where there can be someone that loses and someone that wins. And whoever loses first is going to get a lollipop. And then we let someone lose. And then we say, all right, everyone, let's stop now and talk about, what did Johnny do? He lost. And did he yell? Did he cry? Did he say, I hate you guys, this isn't fair? No, he said, good game. Everyone tried hard. So we're going to model the appropriate behavior, reinforce it with the lollipops, and then eventually, of course, work around to Sally, the girl who we're really trying to target, and let her get a chance to lose. And guess what? In that setup, she's going to want to lose, and she's going to learn how to do it well. And now you've taught her that behavior. But you also may say, hey, man, I don't got time for that. I just got to play the game and get these kids out of here. Then you may give her the clipboard and say, all right, Sally's the coach. She's going to be the one that starts the game and ends the game. And she doesn't even have to be involved in the losing because you don't have the time or space to really deal with that. So a couple quick ways to approach that.
Yeah, definitely. That's where changing the expectations is your best tool. Figure out what can that student be successful in and give them the opportunity, whether it's just adjusting the game or totally having them do a different task that's not within the game. Great question. We've got a couple more minutes.
Did you type a question in there? I didn't see it in the chat box.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, no worries.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, so being in childcare, Russell Barkley, one of my all-time favorite quotes, the kids who need the most love will always ask for it in the most unloving way. What if you have one of those children and you try to do that positive reinforcement? You try to stay on top of it. You give them the tools that they need, and they still are having difficult absorbing that. What do you do? This is meaning parents are just not even offering you any assistance. What is that next step?
Have a hard time absorbing what? So
your praise. Okay, so maybe they're doing things, they're seeking praise, they want that positive attention. You're giving it to them, and you can say, oh, Sam, that was such a great job. You're smart. I like the way you thought about how we can fix this problem and whatnot. And you give them the praise, yet they don't feel worthy of that praise. How do you get them to understand that they're valued enough to accept that praise, and it's okay to accept that praise?
Yeah, I think I'll take a stab and turn over to Crystal. I think this is in that bucket of sometimes there's some behaviors that it takes many years to learn. So often a child that thinks they're not worthwhile, or an adult for that matter, that thinks they're not good enough or not worthy. It took oftentimes a long time to learn that, maybe many years of being taught that lesson. And if we think we're going to be able to come up with a bag of lollipops and throw candy at a kid and they're going to all of a sudden unlearn that, it doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way for us as adults. And so I think in that kind of situation, I'm thinking, what is the long, slow play? So I want to be consistent. I want to, especially if it's a child that hasn't had consistency in their life. I'll also, though, and then I'll stop, Crystal, and hand it to you. I also would go back to my example of the game and letting a child learn how to be a good loser, how to do it the right way. This is one of those behaviors that I see many adults who don't know how to take a compliment and who don't know how to hear praise and really receive that. So it may be where you pull this child aside and say, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do this. I know you don't know how to do it. I know it's uncomfortable, but I know that deep in your heart, you know, you want to be special and you want to be worthwhile. And so I'm going to teach you how to do that. Crystal?
I think that's well said. I would agree with that. The one thing I would add is maybe trying to explore, is there a different way that we could share feedback that maybe the student would be more receptive to? Like maybe, you know, writing them a note or, you know, having a little sticker chart where they earn things throughout the week. Maybe that would kind of sink in a little differently than hearing it a certain way. But I think ultimately it is that long game, and first of all, not taking it personally when it doesn't sink in. You know, sometimes we're doing all the right things and it just takes time. You know, we're one piece of the puzzle on this journey for this child, and we just got to do our best and try those strategies, and then at some point it'll get handed off to the next person that picks up where we leave off, and it all works together to get that end result.
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge because he was very disruptive and he was very negative attention seeking. And when you did give him the attention and you set your boundaries and you did share your expectations and you did discuss the consequences. Okay, you're going to do this, then this is what's going to happen. You know, and we did the first and the second, we did all of those types of things. And then when he did exhibit the behavior that we expected of him, and we did say, oh my God, that was so awesome. I knew you could do it. Then he would explode and be like, well, I don't want to be like this. You know, and he would just go in the opposite direction. And I'm just, oh my God, okay, what did I do wrong? Okay, you know, retrack my steps. Okay, was there an antecedent in there someplace before I even realized it? You know, now it was a new behavior. So I guess revisiting some of those things, you're just going to have to keep revisiting them over and over again till it kind of just, what do they say, till it gets drilled in their head?
Yeah, and I think for a student like that, I would just be kind of taking some notes, like each time these little opportunities come up, and see if I start to see a pattern for, you know, what I did and then what happened with the behavior, and maybe, you know, put on that experimenter hat that Matt talked about and kind of fine tune it and see if you can find something that works a little better.
Can I know we are out of time, and you know, I don't know if there's time for everyone else to extend, but if I could just share one word of encouragement to everyone is closing remarks from me anyway, and that is, especially building Shane on the question you just asked, is oftentimes we don't get to see the fruits of the work that we're doing. And it's an important reminder for all of us that oftentimes the important work and attention and tears and all the other feelings that come up that we're having with these kiddos, the work we're doing, sometimes it's a simple word, it's a simple look, it's an attention, it's just treating them a little differently than maybe they are getting treated at home or by other people. It makes all the difference in the world. And I'll share a quick story. I in my intro, they talked about I used to do work in corrections facilities and youth corrections facilities on the mainland. And I had this kid, Max is his name, and he was a tough kid, man. He was like 14 or 15, and he had murdered someone and was in youth corrections. And he was, you know, a drug addict and just a horribly broken little 14-year-old boy. And I worked with him for about a year, and then he went on to a different facility, and I didn't see him again. And it was probably about 10 years later. I, of course, had worked with many kids, and he had kind of escaped my mind. And I'm walking in the mall, and this kid, like 22, 23-year-old comes up to me and says, hey, Matt, you remember me? And I've worked with enough kids that I just say yes, even though I was like, oh yeah, hey, how you doing? He says, hey, it's me, Max. He says, how you doing? It's good. He said, hey, you remember that thing you said to me? And this kid at this point, you know, he'd been in prison now, and he had neck tattoos, and he was a tough looking man at this point. Say, hey, you remember that thing you said to me? And I said, well, no, what is that? And he pulls his backpack off and pulls out this little, notebook he has where he's writing his raps and his rhymes. And he opens up to this page and he points to this thing. And I don't even remember what it was, but I had said something to him, probably a throwaway comment in passing, and he just, you know, and it meant something to him and stuck in this kid's head. And it was carrying this journal around 10 years later with this thing I said, not because I said something brilliant, not because I'm anything special, but because the attentions, whatever it was I gave that kiddo in that moment, it meant something to him, and he carried that with him for years. You all are saying those things and doing those things as well. And we often don't get the kid 10 years later that comes back and says, hey, that thing you said, that thing you did meant something to me. So my encouragement to you all is use your head, but follow your heart. And these kids need you. And even though they're not going to very often stop and say, hey, thank you, Mr. and Mrs., thank you for doing that. They're probably going to throw a chair, curse at you, or run away like they always do. But know that what you're doing, it has meaning and makes a difference. So thank you for all your work. Thanks for having us. Crystal, anything in closing?
Nope, I can't beat that, Matt. Thank you guys for being here. Thanks for having us. It's really been fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt and Crystal, and I invite you all to give a virtual round of applause or use the reactions, share in the chat. Just thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, hope you all have a good
welcome
Thanksgiving next week, and we hope to see you soon.
Have a great weekend. Happy Thanksgiving.